Naomi, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to welcome Daphne, Levinge, and we leave out the Shackleton bit for this particular talk, to finish the Zoom series, which I hope you've all enjoyed, for this season. And she is going to talk on her father. So Daphne, with your own title, and it's over to you. So if you could share your screen, and could everybody else please go on mute?
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, Philip, and thank you all for joining in this afternoon, and indeed for asking me to talk about my father's life. I'm going to start by saying that I really didn't know my father for very long, because he was 56 when I was born, and by the time I had a bit of sense or had any sort of meaningful memories, he was in his 70s and well beyond the prime of his life. Luckily for us and his family, he did live on
Daphne,
into his 89th year.
Daphne,
yeah.
I don't know whether you're on shared screen at this stage, but we can't see you. We can see you, which is delight. But we can't see your slides if you have any.
I can see them, Philip.
Yeah, I'm going on.
We can't see the share. Can anybody else see the shared screen? Just wave if you can.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the second slide. Can you see that?
Yeah, I have that.
I don't see that at all.
Yeah, that's fine. I can see it.
Okay, for ahead. I'll just have to disappear.
That's my first slide, really showing my father as he was in the prime of his life. And my account, which I'm going to give you this afternoon, really is about this long life he had on the Shannon through, in fact, 8 decades, including so many activities on the lake. The Shannon friends he knew, as well as some of the boats he built and places he sailed in. He was born at Carna House, just north of Kiltoom, at the edge of Loughree, of course, on the Roscommon shore. He was born in 1894. Carna is now owned by the Department of Defence and the home of the Western Brigade Rifle Range. And of course, this extends out into Loughree, and we are, of course, not allowed to enter there when there's rifle going on. His father, Robert, was Robert Levinge, and he was renting this house and land from his older brother, William's widow. Robert Levinge, Walter's father, his brother William had been killed jumping this wall in front of the house, and so his widow was renting the land to Walter's father, Robert. Other members of the family, his grandfather and other members of the family, were living in New Park House, and this here is New Park and the garden there. Just to show you on the map, Carna here, New Park here, New Point, and in about 1898, the family moved across to Cradoff here at the south end of Coosan Lake. The Levinges originally came to Ireland and settled in County Westmeath at Knockdrin early in the 17th century. The first Levinge came as a Solicitor General. They bought their land in Westmeath and lived there, and this Knockdrin has recently been sold and is long since out of the Levinge family. Walter's middle name was Hodson, named from his maternal grandmother's family, and they had a long connection also with County Roscommon, including St. John's House and, of course, Hudson's Bay. Walter would have spent many of his early years hearing about Loughree and the river from his father, Robert Levinge. And this is he as a young man and as an old man who lived on to be 90 and died in 1940. He was very much a Shannon man. He was a farmer, he was a land agent and a yachtsman, and he owned a number of boats over his years, including the Narcissus, a steam yacht, which I'd love to know a little bit more about as to who built it. I think she sank eventually in Kusenloch because part of her boiler was always on the shore, just at the south end of the lake. Robert, as I say, was quite an authority on the Shannon, and he wrote a pamphlet, Sportsman and Tourist Guide to the Shannon. When Robert, Walter's father, was 23, he was on board the Audax, which was the last boat to come down through the Loch Earn Canal before it closed in 1873. And aged 8 in 1902, Walter remembered being with his father, Robert, at a Loch Allen regatta, and presumably they would have travelled up the Shannon through the Loch Allen Canal on the Narcissus. This, I think, is my grandfather, Walter's father, Robert, in his late 80s. And I think this is the motor sailor he built called Ida. I think these are the Cribby Islands behind, and this would tie in, of course, with where the Levings still owned New Park. Walter's mother, on the left, Hester Shine, was born at Camas Park, which is just outside Cashel in County Tipperary, now the home of the Hyde racing family. And I like to think that she met Walter's father, Robert, through a Shannon connection. So many of us have met our partners through the mighty river. Hester Shine's aunt was Dorothea O'Grady Lefroy, and she made frequent visits to the mills at Killaloe to visit Harry Lefroy. And I have a description of a visit to the mills, here they are on the right, in 1880, written when Hester was aged 19 and before she married Robert. May 1880, drove to Killaloe with aunt, Harry meeting us halfway, very showery, but a fine day for sightseeing. Went out to see the beauties of Killaloe, went first to Claresford, which is really lovely, then through the extensive town of Killaloe to Pierhead, and on to Vaughan Hill to see the view to the cathedral, then to the mills, which are much larger than I expected. They grind Indian corn, wheat, flour, cut stones, polish them, and weave and spin wool into friezes, etc. Came home to tea, went out afterwards to see the Board of Works, concrete stones, making for the South Weir, concrete spelled C-O-N-C-R-E-A-T. I think it was quite a new invention, probably in 1880. So Robert and Hester married, and they moved across, as I say, to Coosan Lake, to the Inner Lakes, and to Crayduff. Shortly after he moved there, Robert, Walter's father, made the cutting so that he could get his steam yacht Narcissus through and moor underneath the house. And this was dredged and often now known as Levinge's Cut. Although the story is, one story is that he built it so that locals in Killinure could travel to Athlone quicker. But as there was a ferry at Coosan Point, I think this was probably not the case. He simply wanted to get his Narcissus into the Inner Lakes. From Crayduff, Walter went to the Ranelagh School in Athlone, which he always said had a very, very tough regime. He spent a lot of time mitching on the Springwell Road, apparently. His mother had died, aged 47, when Walter was only 13. She died of pneumonia caught while out cycling. When he left school, he was then farming with his father, Robert, with whom, not unexpectedly, he had a difficult time, because Robert was, by all accounts, a tough, bluff, and a very robust character and hard to live with. He was farming with his father, and then at the same time as he left school, he became apprenticed to the Brown brothers, boatbuilders, the Brown boatbuilders on the Strand in Athlone, one of the 3 boatbuilders which I think were located there. But by June the 1913, he was on board the Teutonic on passage to Canada to see the country and, as he always said, to get away from his domineering father. My mother always said he had £1 in his pocket when he went to Canada, which could be because that's worth about 120 euros today. So that started an adventure for him in Canada. And he always claimed that he learned a lot of his boat building there. As he always said, he worked for nearly every boat building firm in Canada. He traveled widely in Canada, was always attracted to the Great Lakes area, working on many different jobs as well as boat building. And he often spoke about arriving in Winnipeg by train in deep snow and having to walk barefoot from the station to the town to buy new boots, as those he had were stolen while he slept on the train. At some point in Canada, he joined the Merchant Navy, working for a line which had a small number of ships tracking up and down between Halifax, Nova Scotia, and Bermuda. He was a ship's carpenter and always proud to tell us he was called Chips. During the First World War, he then joined the Royal Canadian Navy Volunteer Reserve as a shipwright on this ship, the Niobe, and also on the Shearwater. And those 2 ships, I understand, were on patrol along the Atlantic coast of Canada, and particularly on the Gulf of St. Lawrence. This is the only image we have of him in Canada, I think. This may be his girlfriend, Mayne, after which he called his first Shannon 1 design, I don't know. But this is on a paddle ship outside, beside Toronto on Lake Ontario. And this paddle ship went between some of the smaller islands, apparently on Lake Ontario. By the summer of 1919, he'd returned back to Athlone and to Creaduff. Letters from his father in May 1919 show how Robert was being pressed, or kept pressing Walter to return to Ireland, because his father, Robert, was increasingly worried, as he says, about the damn Sinn Féiners and rebels who were boycotting the Mayne farm and preventing the harvesting of 40 acres of oats, forcing him to send his farm workers away lest they got mobbed or killed. Troubled times then. But this, in fact, was very timely for the Shannon 1 design class, because Morgan Giles had, the new class of the Shannon 1 had been adopted with Morgan Giles designing the Shannons and coming off the drawing board, I think at the end of 1920. Philip will have told you all about that. So he was very busy in the 1920s then, setting up his boat building business. And in fact, during the 20s, he built something like 20 Shannon 1 designs, as well as the prototype, and including Shannon 34, Mayme, a boat for himself, possibly called after this girlfriend. He always said she was a good boat. If the weather was light and she was in good humor, she could beat everything. For many years, he was pressurized by his old sailing rival, Bertie Waller, to sell her to him, which he did in 1930. he had owned and raced an 18-foot centerboard Iris at Loch Ree Yacht Club and at Loch Derg Yacht Club in the regattas of 1920 and 21. Certainly, he struck quite a figure, I think, coming back from Canada. Alfie Delaney told me how he remembered him in his 20s, describing a social event in the Longworth Hall, Northgate Street, Athlone, where Alfie was there, where members of Loch Ree and Loch Derg Yacht Club were present when Walter appeared, dressed in a naval uniform, short white jacket, looking very tanned and very handsome. And I remember asking Alfie then, why did he never marry? Why wasn't he? And Alfie said, well, just there wasn't very many suitable women sailing or around. So there's Cradoff, where he started his building works. But he did have a very serious girlfriend at that time, and that was Dorothy Strevens. And there's rather a tragic story attached to that. She never married him, and it upset him greatly. And she did, in fact, some may well remember her living in Kiltoom House on her own, chain smoking and surrounded by a lot of smelly little dogs. Just to add in here, Walter had two sisters. This on the left is Ida, his older sister, and she had quite an interesting life as well. Born and reared on the edge of Loch Ree and spent many days and years on the lake and loving the lake, she met a handsome young army officer who was stationed in Athlone, and with him, she married him, and with him she traveled the world from Dorset to Egypt on to Shanghai. And when Hong Kong was taken over by the Japanese, she and her husband were captured and spent the war years as prisoners of war, he in Formosa and she in Stanley Camp, Hong Kong. And if anybody's interested in how Ida survived, I have written a short account of her life, which you could find on this website here, which is an old historical Hong Kong Historical Society website. And certainly her Irishness and possibly the hard life that she had growing up with no mother, a bluff and robust old father, probably did stand her in good stead. And there is some reference from people who were with her in the camp how her Irishness certainly did help her survive those years. She came back grey and thin, as you can imagine. This then is her younger sister, Vera, who went to live in Dublin and also came and visited regularly. So in the 30s, he was 20s and 30s, as I say, he was very busy building Shannons. During the 30s, he had built another 9 Shannon 1 designs, including 57, which he built for himself. Obviously, it wasn't too taken with 57, because the following year, he built the last boat that he built for himself, of course, 58. And all during those years, 20s and 30s, he regularly partook in regattas up and down the Shannon, going up to the North Shannon Yacht Club, sailing up the river, sleeping in a tent. And traveling in the 20s was particularly risky. And he always talked about the time the Republicans took over Quaker Island, I think it was, provisioned themselves by commandeering the Grand Canal barges. And he talked about 2 sailors who, because they were wearing yachting caps, looking like the Black and Tans, were taken onto the island, and they were later released, of course. And he used to talk a lot about the stealing and removing of boats from the yacht club, where those who were on the run were able to get across the river and on to the west of Ireland. And he himself described how crossing the bridge in Athlone on foot and at night, he was about to be stopped by an RIC checkpoint, when an unknown figure came close alongside him as he approached the checkpoint. When Walter was asked his name, he replied, "I'm Walter Levinge." And when his unknown companion was asked, replied, "I'm with Walter Levinge." They both passed through the checkpoint, and his companion, unknown companion, disappeared into the conic night without a single word to Walter. He was also busy in the 30s building wags, mermaids, and he also built an IDRA 14-foot. And he used to go quite regularly to Dún Laoghaire to sail. And he had always had a story of overhearing himself described, the winner of a race, as the farmer in the felt hat up from the country. It greatly amused him. Most of his life then in the 30s and in those years were spent, as I say, sailing up the Shannon, sleeping under the sail or in the bell tent here, shooting. And I think that photograph is probably taken on the steps at the yacht club in Loughree. And he, of course, was a very keen fisherman. This, I suspect, is the wood of Muckla, just off beside Carna Bay. He didn't build many boats during the 1940s, although he was actively sailing 1958 and traveling up and down, as I say, to Lough Derg in particular for the mayfly fishing and for the sailing. He did take part in the preliminary Olympic Games sailing trials in Dún Laoghaire in 1948, representing Loughree Yacht Club, but he didn't make the final trials. In 1950, when he was 51, he astonished many of his family and sailing friends by marrying Marion Cockle, and here they are on their wedding day. Just after the war, they got married. She'd come to work in the Bank of Ireland in Athlone. She was a clergyman's daughter from the west of Ireland, from Leenane, Swinford and Leenane, and she never got over the fact, as she always laughed, she couldn't have married somebody further from the sea, which she adored. This is my older sister Hester at the Yacht Club in 1949, and anybody recognize her two little friends on either side? This is another photo of that time, late 40s, early 50s probably. And if anybody has any idea who the people are, it'd be interesting to know. I think on the left is Pompey Delaney, Tommy Gallagher. I'd love to know who this dodgy looking fellow is here. This is Lionel Lister, my father. Reggie thinks this could be Posey Holmes. Walter Milligan, Betty Goodbody. Nobody can't find out who this person is here. And these two here, if you know who they are, I would be interested, and also this gentleman here. These others are a little bit unknown too, so it would be interesting to know who they are. This, I think, is Squeaky Smith. And this is, of course, Ruth Delaney, Ruth Heard. So have a look, and if there's anybody that you recognize, I would be interested in knowing who they are. I'm afraid I've no date for it, but it would be the late 40s, early 50s. Lovely hedge there, giving lots of shelter. In 1954, 52, Uffa Fox came over to Loughree Yacht Club for the IDRA championships, and he and Walter spent considerable time discussing Shannon 1 design, and out of this, Uffa Fox designed the Jolly Boat, and Walter always took a great interest in her. His three daughters were born between 1947 and 1951, and modelled on his father's motorboat Ida. He built the Swan. Up till then, I think they'd been going around the lake in this sort of boat, which my mother was quite a nervous sailor. She wouldn't have enjoyed and was always worrying, and with small children as well, she would have been even more worried, I think. So this is the first day out of the Swan, which happily is very well looked after by Alison and her family. And here she is on the first day out. And really from May until October, every Sunday and every fine day was spent up and down Lough Ree and on into November. This, I think, is November 1954. Fishing, he was a great man for sniggling, and we had many enjoyable evenings sniggling worms for perch, particularly between Coosan Point and Hare Island. And this is a mighty haul. In 1955, he had a very enjoyable and interesting trip through Ardnacrusha in this little day sailor, the Plover, which he bought for a cousin. And here they are about to go through Ardnacrusha Loch. He slowed down a bit then, because in the late 1950s, he had a heart attack while turning out, as he said, turning out a couple of calves into a field one morning. And he spent 3 or 4 weeks in Portiuncula Hospital. But he was kept up to date with the Shannon and Shannon 1 design sailing. And we certainly have a note, and he recorded being visited by Lionel Lister, Walter Milligan, Dick Shackleton, and Guy Landon, among others. This, we think, at least I think, is Walter in one of his sailing during the 50s with Susan McGann. And I do think I remember that day, because I think I remember them capsizing and being extremely worried that they were both going to be drowned. I think he was Commodore of Lough Ree Yacht Club between 1955 and 1966. And it must have been quite a turbulent time, as I remember him being so deeply opposed to the move of Lough Ree sailing from Ballyglass to Hudson's Bay, which racing took place there between 1958 and 1970. And in fact, he was no longer racing 58 then. And we 3 girls were prohibited from going over to Hudson's Bay. And I remember big rows about all of this. It was as much to do with the drinking that was going on, possibly. And he was always very protective about 58. And we'd certainly frequented the Ballyglass Yacht Club, where the main activity, of course, was swimming and boat storage at that time. Nevertheless, in 1962, he did get 58 out of the loft, and we went as a family camping and sailing in Loch Corrib. And Alison has found, or Hester, I'm not sure which, have found the program, and we did win some races, and I remember it as being a wonderful weekend. At that time also, he was very active in the Inland was a founder member of the Inland Waterways Association of Ireland, and he became involved with many campaigns and many events aimed at improving the access to facilities on the River Shannon and on its navigation. This here is the launch of a new crane in the docks of Athlone, and you'll probably see some people that you recognize: Harry Rice, Norman Furlong, Cynthia Rice, myself, and I know that man, but I can't think of his name. It's my father, Mr. Newell, I think. And again, I'd love to know who all of those people were. This here is another of, there he is at the launch of the St. Brendan or St. Kieran, I'm not sure which it was, but that was in the 50s or the early 60s, I think. the Shannon boat rallies also, he loaded up the Swan, and there she is there with tents and camping gear, and headed upriver. You may see some people in some of these slides that I think with the 66, there's a Swan, and it's all coming into a lock. A barge, I don't know if is that Peter Mulvihill, but people will remember, I'm sure, some of these characters. And I have a feeling that's a Lefroy boat. Is that the Avril? But maybe not. But anyway, they're if anybody's interested, they'd be welcome to have a further look at them.
Yes, Daphne, that's the Avril, all right. Yes.
Oh, very good, very good. And yeah, do join in, because is that Peter Mulvihill, I wonder? Would he have been on that barge?
The
That could
barge is the Fox, Daphne.
Is it? Yeah, is that Dougal McMahon? I don't know. Do you recognize any other people there, Alan?
No.
No. Anyway, I think that could be Andy Colleen. He always wore an Aran jumper, I think. My mother, the dog who had to come with us. And this is probably Alan Furlong. Is it on the Francesca?
Certainly the Francesca.
You're on mute.
Yeah. And my father always wore his yachting cap. 1967. This is probably one of the last days of racing, which he at Loch Derg, and we did bring the 58 down that year. I think it was 1971 or 72. He always insisted on rigging the boat out at an anchor somewhere out here. He couldn't bear to rig the boat along with all the other boats on the jetties. He was one of the last to sail with a cotton sail. And of course, he was a very good helmsman, but I think he enjoyed and was probably even a better sheet hand, which he did prefer, especially in light weather. And he always seemed to be able to find a puff of wind to keep his boat moving. He smoked his pipe when he was sailing, and many remember with amusement seeing him sitting up after a rare capsize, still with his pipe lit and smoking away. He actually never called it a capsize. He always referred to a capsize as an upset. So just to mention a few of his other activities and friends, those from Athlone might be interested in this photograph, 1947 at Hester's christening. No sign of the baby, but that's my father there, Teddy Strevens, Mrs. Telford, Mrs. Strevens, Mr. Telford, who of course managed the woolen mills in Athlone. And again, I'd love to know who some of these people are. That's Mrs. Chapman, I do believe. Mrs. Simpson, Harry Simpson, who owned and lived at Portlick. My mother there. Squeaky Smith, I think, and Greta Baird from Auburn, all people who would have been members of Lochrie Yacht Club. There again is Harry Simpson from Portlick at my christening, and Ursula Crofton. This is a nice picture of Brian O'Brien Kennedy. My father would have been visiting his boatyard up at Jamestown and was examining, I'm not sure what here, but there he is, often called upon to give advice. His other great friend was Guy Landon, and so many of the boats on the lakes used old Shannon 1 design sails, as my father did, but this is Guy Landon on the Seabird. Sean McBride and my father in the 50s. This is Ned Duffy from Hare Island, who he used to have many, many chats with, sitting at the Lord's Harbour and talking to Ned about fishing and all sorts of other activities. This is my father in a typical sprit sail, rather dirty sprit sail, in his fishing boat. And this is with Sir Charles Gardner, who married Lord Castlemaine's daughter, Eva Hancock, and regularly came back and in fact lived some time in Westmeath, and they were very much fishing companions. He went on to become Governor General of Western Australia and Tasmania later on. Air Chatterton, my father was responsible really for the Chattertons coming to the Inner Lakes, as he pointed Air to a site from where they developed the Portonina dockyard. Another picture of Sean McBride with Colonel Tracy, who was a great friend of Walter's, and we'll see shortly a boat that he built for Colonel Tracy. He was in Northern Ireland. His wife was a linen, descended from a linen family. Union's family never came near the south of Ireland. So here he is with Sean McBride. Many of his friends, of course, kept their boats at Crayduff. This might be the Scullavar. She was certainly there. The Seagull and the Charles Whitten, and is that Capella? My memory is going. This, of course, is O'Brien Kennedy's, the St. James. They came up the Shannon from Shannon Harbour, I think, on up and went on up to Jamestown. And the great excitement was the donkey on board for the journey. And I'm not sure who this little boat is here. Hester Allison probably remember. But many friends kept their boats at the harbour and at Crayduff, the Bells, the O'Clearys, the Sullivans, and they provided and were great friends with Walter, and many kept the boats there, then went to the cut, and my father, coming back from fishing, would regularly stop in for a whiskey and a chat on the way back.
Daphne, was that the not the St. James? I think that might have been the St. Bridget.
Yes,
Maybe it is the James. John, you might know that.
I wonder when I go back to that. It looks like, oh yeah, it's the Bridget. Sorry, it's the St. Bridget. Yes, you're dead right. You can actually see it on the thing. Sorry about that. Of course, it's the St. Bridget. This is the Geordie. If I remember, anybody remember old Mr. Illingworth, who brought this steam yacht, and then it went on. Alan Reinhardt, of course, took it on after his time. But there he is at the wheel of that. This is, I wonder if many recognize this place. This is the Licaro Canal shortly after it was opened, I do believe, and the Swan there. This was a BBC interview which he did, and again, I wonder, is there a recording of this? It might have been the program Down Your Way, but does anybody have an idea of I certainly can remember them coming and interviewing my father about the Shannon and Loughree and the building of the Shannon One designs.
They did a series on the Shannon in about 1962.
Yes.
Would that have been around then?
It would have been around then, but it looks like it could have been. And what was it called, John?
It was Down Your Way.
Yeah, that's in my memory. That's what I think it was too. So I don't know whether that recording is still archived and available. It's something somebody may well know.
Certainly in the British Museum, in the British Library, there's a recording of Harry Rice, which was done by the BBC sometime in the early 50s.
Yes.
It was mostly talking about life on the islands, not about boat building.
Yes.
Daphne, they came to Dromineer and they set up a wire recorder in the Sail Inn. And my father told me that Horatio Darby and Eric Hooker and a few of the locals came, and they didn't say that they had the recording going, but my father went to London to try and resurrect this and find out. And they said, oh no, we couldn't publish any of it. Now, also the BBC destroyed a lot of their archives, so there wasn't a recording left. And because otherwise he wanted to get a copy. I'd love to have had that. I dearly would.
Yes.
It must be great value. Yeah, but it was totally unpublishable.
Yeah, so maybe it was the same BBC team who came and went up and down the Shannon. He was also often called when there was any sort of crisis or of boats on the Shannon. Here he is with the Janet. I think this was just outside the cut. I'm not sure exactly where, but he was certainly called to help there. These are terrible photographs, I'm afraid. This is the St. Clair, the John Williams motor torpedo boat, which sank in the winter under Ladywell in the harbour there. And we were all brought over there, and we were greatly impressed that Tom Stobart, who was one of Hillary's teammates climbing Mount Everest, stripped off in midwinter and went underneath the water to see and to help raise her again from the waters. So that's just a few of his friends and activities that I thought you might be interested in. But back then to talk a little bit more about his boat building. As I say, he built his boats at Crayduff in the workshop here. Previous to that, he built in this long dark shed here, but he extended that in the early 50s so that he could build bigger boats. And then he just used this old shed for storing timber. And he did have in this building, in the old building, a circular saw, which was powered by a Model T engine, and later a water-cooled Ford engine. He also had a machine installed which planed wood, but he never seemed to use this. His new workshop, many can remember, was heated by a potbelly stove using offcuts of wood, and it was always very, very cold. He never had electricity in these sheds because, and in fact, there was never electricity in the house either until 1960. And his refusal to use electricity was, he said, because of a fire he once experienced in a workshop in Canada. He worked a very strict regime, leaving the house at 9 in the morning, working all morning, coming back at lunchtime, and then back again. The Shannon 1 designs were built from the stem keel up with 4 or 5 templates fixed to the keel, and lots of string always seemed to be involved. But for lake and fishing boats, he used an inverted mold, and the ribs and the planks were laid down on this mold. This was a skill in itself because, of course, the mold would have had to be precisely measured. And he was particularly proud of this method of construction. He always said fewer ribs got broken when he was building, and the build was much quicker. Throughout all his life, he was building 18-foot lake fishing boats for the Shannon, and indeed for further afield. And he could turn one of those out in about 2 weeks, with the Shannon 1 designs taking him 3 weeks. His speciality, and that's one of the workshop. That's a classic photograph, which his classic boat was this Carvel built fishing boat. And it's a very bad photograph, I'm sorry, with this brass insert here so that there were no overlapping planks, which would have made a noise when he was fishing. And I think this is probably under Hare Island. I'm not quite sure. I think it's probably under Island in 1977. And he certainly did take time off from boat building for the mayfly fishing for haymaking and growing his vegetables. And he took up his boat building again in September. And much of his work then, of course, was to do with the repairs to Shannon's after the annual regattas. He never condoned sailing Shannon's too hard. And I think he was never very happy and repairing Shannon 1 designs, but of course he did do that. He was no businessman. He had no office, and he was hopeless at all sorts of any paperwork, and he kept no records at all. Although Marion, his wife, having worked in the bank, was of some help, and she used to write letters to him, for him. He was always reluctant to bill people for boats and repairs, and was very slow and apologetic to send invoices, I remember. In the early 1960s, he was in his mid-60s by then. He was aware that he needed help in the workshop, and he was very fortunate that Rodney Lomax came to live nearby, and he started as an apprentice, cycling over daily from Rosanna House in Ballykieran. Up to then, his only help were us children, when we had occasionally been dragged in, holding a dolly against the rivets, which were out of his reach as he hammered away along lines of planks and ribs. And so he built a lot of boats, and the expansion of the Shannon 1 design fleet really began then. He built 17 Shannon 1 designs in the 1960s with Rodney, and Rodney also built more in his own workshop once he set up in Mullaghmore. And he was helped then over the years by Ambrose Duggan of Athlone, Peter Quigley, of course, and Brendan Mulvihill and Michael McCormick from Athlone and Coosan. And they were all helped at various stages. Very few photographs, I'm afraid, of Shannon 1 designs. They don't seem to have very many at all. One of the Chatterton boats, I think, people may remember the car at Crayduff. And as this is Peter and Tony Chatterton, I think this is, they both had 2 boats built. One they brought by water, and I think the other by car. This is the 82 going off with the Lefroy family, Thea, Gwen, Tony, a cousin of ours, Alison, my father. I presume that's you, John?
It is, yeah. Slim and trim.
Yes. He was very proud to visit the boat show in the RDS in 1970 when Shannon 1 Design 83 was exhibited. But this is the Galway boat show in 1980, where he exhibited this Carville-built boat. And various people came down for the boat show. There he is. There's Jimmy, Brendan Mulvihill, Peter Quigley, and my father, all dressed up for the boat show. And my father was terribly pleased that Maura Gwagan Quinn, who was a minister at the time, told him the boat was a work of art. He also built at this time this Kestrel 22, a wooden clinker built sloop, and he was very proud of this. And this he built for his great friend Colonel Tracy. And here she is at Williamstown. He built this day wasn't a sailor, just a day boat for the Bishop of Cork's brother, Ernan Perdue, and it was based in Bandon, and I believe that it is now somewhere in the continent, having been sold from there. He always took a great interest in the seagull, and when I met and married Jonathan, I asked my father, Jonathan was present, how long did he think the seagull would last? 30 years, he said. Well, actually, she's still going 47 years after that. thanks to the good care that Jonathan and David in particular are giving it. When his boat building days were coming to end, he did, of course, slow down, but he still kept on building in the 70s when he was actually approaching 80 years of age. And he was always, in a letter I have, he wrote to Alfie in 1971, he said that he had 6 boats on order. And he was happy to report that Peter Quigley and Jimmy Fury had good orders in 2. The last boats he built when he was in his 80s were 2 lake fishing boats, which he said which he did to use up the last of the timber. And Alison, who lived and looked after him in his old age, remembers how difficult it was and how he persevered to get suitable planks from the remaining boards of wood he had in stock. He was always very thrifty. In a letter to his brother-in-law in England, written when he was 84, he wrote, "I got very little sailing this year. Weather was so bad. The girls had the racing boat out, but did bad. Whoopsie daisy. Missed going to Lochdarg this year, as last year, nothing but 4 old timers sitting on the shore there. I didn't go because I didn't want to make it 5. He remained very active for the rest of his life, for the last few years. This would have been when he was 86, I think, mowing the meadow for hay. And he took great pleasure in building beehives. He was always a beekeeper all his life. Always very helpful, I think, to other boat builders, always took a great active interest in the Shannon 1 design and the SOD Regatta in particular, right up until he died in his 89th year in 1982. But he rarely came ashore then. He was really completely happy with the pipe lit up, the trilby on his head, watching the racing from the middle of Loch Ree at the tiller of the Swan. And I think, just as my final slide, he would have been very pleased that our son David here and my grandson Henry carry on looking after the Seagull. And David's handiwork is here, having built these duck boards for the Seagull. And this, of course, is Simon Bell, who was responsible for a lot of the rejuvenation and reworking of the Seagull over the last few years. So that's the end. And again, I thank Alfie Delaney, who shared so many of the memories of my father, and also Vincent too, and particularly to Hester and Alison, who also provided me with some of the photographs and also some of the reminiscences. So thank you very much.
Daphne, that was just fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. It really gave us an insight to Walter that we just hadn't known, at least I hadn't known. I have fond memories of him in the Swan, sitting at the back, smoking his pipe, with the 3 daughters quiet up in the front and Marion beside him. And we, of course, were out in the lake with father and not allowed to say anything either. Those are my memories of Walter. And of course, that hat never came off his head. I'm sure there are questions. Anybody got questions that they'd like to pose to Daphne?
Daphne, do you know he had an export market?
Oh, tell me more.
One of my clients, an Emerald Star, fell in love with him and his lake boats and ordered one up and paid for it. And I collected it from Athlone and delivered it down to Fenit, where it went as deck cargo over to Rotterdam, where it was picked up by the new owner. That was in 1976, 75, 76.
Well, I must say I don't remember that, but Hester Allison may well have remembered that. A lake boat.
A lake boat, yeah.
Yeah. And how did they were on one of your Emerald Star cruisers, pulled into the harbor? Yeah.
So there we are.
Daphne,
that was good.
I'm intrigued about the timing. You say you went to Canada in 1913. Was that correct? Oh, I'm sorry about that now.
1913. Yes, I think it was 13. If I just look at.
Yeah, but the outbreak of the war was 1914. He must have.
No, he was.
He must have
He was
traveled.
very young.
Yeah, he was young, but he worked for a lot of boat builders in that time. So he got an awful lot of experience in quite a short period of time before he then became a ship's carpenter. So he was only really working and building boats for a year. And then when he came back, he only had about a year before there was that meeting in Athlone. And then he was building the Shannons. So I just find
certainly.
Sorry,
certainly the letter is definitely dated 1919 when he came back, and he may not have joined the Canadian Navy Reserve at the very start of the war.
Correct. Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
I suppose also we don't. I don't know when the Canada came into the war. I mean, was it 1914, or were they hanging around until a couple of years later? I don't know.
Probably same time as the Americans, so that was.
No, they came in with Britain. Yeah. The Empire and Britain came in all at the same time.
Yeah, I can add a little to that, John. I worked for the Canadian government. The Canadian Navy started. I can't give an exact date, but it was sort of about the 1910s. The British transferred an old cruiser, the Niobe, which is one of the pictures there, to Canada, and there were a number of local vessels procured as well. Most of them, I think, may have been civilian types, but the Navy certainly was in existence in 1914 and gradually expanded. But the whole thing was. The Dominion of Canada was part of the British Empire, and they came in straight away at the very beginning of the war.
Sorry, I didn't mean to distract ourselves from that, but he certainly was apprenticed for quite a short time and became a very successful boat builder within a very short time.
Yeah, he may. I have in the back of my head an idea that in that old workshop, my grandfather, his father, had a rudimentary boat building shed and did. I have and I don't think Hester Allison remember that, but I have a feeling that his father might have built boats as well.
Right.
Have a slight memory. What was that shed used for before? That anyway. So we but certainly the records of him going out to Canada is from the shipping. You can search shipping people migrating, emigrating or traveling in 1913. I think is what I said. I found record of him traveling to Canada.
Daphne, did you not say that he did a sort of an apprenticeship with Browns in Athlone?
Yeah. But I suspect that must have been a very short time. He definitely had a difficult time. His father was very difficult, and he always said that he wanted to see the world and to get away from him as well. If he was born in 1894 and he went out in 1913, that made him 19, wasn't it? He was 19 when he went out. And he presumably, and I think he left school at 16. So he might have been 3 years with the father farming, and then going as helping the father on the farm, and been working with the boat with the Browns in Athlone.
The other thing that slightly surprised me, there was always a rumor in our family that Walter had a farm up in Kinnegad somewhere, and he drove his cattle up there, and then he drove them on to the market in Dublin. Was there any truth in that rumor or story?
No, he did have a farm in Kinnegad, and actually, when he was 16, the census records show that he was staying at the farm in the 1911 census, I think. So he was there at quite a young age, and I think he would be cycling up there. No, the cattle went by train from Athlone to the nearest station, I think was Hill of Down. Am I correct, Hester? And they walked the cattle then from there.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't ever remember them going to the markets in Dublin. He had an agent who would have bought the fattened cattle then. He used to buy cattle out the west of Ireland, and then get them on the train and bring them on up to the farm in near Kinnegad, and also had a few at Cradoff as well.
Yeah, I've actually I think, Philip, you're right about that. He did tell me that they had a field in Tares Pass, but they used to stop over there, and he cycled home, left the cattle in Tares Pass, and went back the next day and drove them back up to Kinnegad.
Right.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Well,
yeah,
I do remember that
sorry,
story.
that's a slight aside now. Back to his boatbuilding days. Any other questions? I mean, it was a fascinating talk, and thank you very much. You put a lot of time into it. Tim, do I see you waving?
Yes, you do. Yes. First of all, to say thank you, Daphne. It brought home wonderful memories of the Shannon days. To ask a quick question, what was the last of the Shannons that he built?
I'd have to look at the register to see that now. Was it help me out there on that, somebody?
117.
Really? Yes, that's very good.
117. Was that Tom? Who was that for?
Tom Kelly.
Tom Kelly. I was trying to think of Tom Kelly. I couldn't think of his name. That's my recollection as well. That it was Tom Kelly. It was the last one he built. Yeah.
I was very proud to have one of his boats anyway. So thank you very much. It was wonderful.
Well, nice to see you, Tim.
Yes, lovely.
I just have a tiny little addition to that St. Clair interlude in Ladywell Harbour. Tom Stobart went down. Now he was a sort of an adventurer, I think, but he was the actual photographer on the trip up to Everest. Anyway, he went down, had a look at the St. Clair in the midst of winter, and came up shivering and saying he had never experienced the cold. It was desperately cold, and it was a huge experience for him. And of course, we were absolutely thrilled because he'd said he'd never experienced cold like it. That was my memory. But, you know, that Killinure Lough had Mount Everest bet for cold. And we all took that in a very, very positive way.
Well, you swam regularly, no doubt. Was he a swimmer? Did he enjoy the water, or did he prefer to sit on it?
I can only remember him swimming once or twice at the most, and he had an ancient swimsuit which was a sort of cottony sort of a swimsuit. Can you remember him swimming, Hester? No.
I do. The only time I remember swimming is we were having a picnic and he was in the boat and it was desperately hot, and he somehow got himself into the water because he was roasting hot. I don't remember any swimming. It was just to get himself in. That's all.
So fine. I'm looking for other hands going up, and I don't see any. Tim, yes.
Yeah, just one other question, if you don't mind. Daphne, what was when he was working in Ontario?
Yes.
On Lake Ontario, do you know what region of the lake it was? I've been there myself in near Toronto, and I was just wondering, was it in on that region of Lake Ontario? You don't know where he was working?
Unfortunately, we don't know at all. At least I don't, and I don't think I've asked Alison and Hester. I do know that he was definitely based in Toronto because of that photograph on that paddle ship, and also many years later, Hester was traveling through Canada, and she was instructed to go into a certain bank in Toronto because he had deposited some money there.
Oh.
Hester went in and retrieved the money. That's why she's so wealthy at the moment.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, what happened was they received me very nicely. It was the bank on Yonge Street, the Bank of Nova Scotia, I think it's called. And when I was later in America and so on, they all said this was an atrociously inefficient bank. It was well known through the States. Anyway, they said I could have it if I don't know whether they were sussing me out or something, but my experience of Toronto was awful. I couldn't wait, so I left the money. Years later, I asked him and he said he did get it. But I do remember he talked, and if somebody could mention it, I remember that there's a suburb of Toronto, it begins with S. I can't really, if anyone knew of it, I would recognize it. It's not a particularly salubrious, or it wasn't then, area of Toronto on the outskirts. It begins with S.
Okay. Vincent, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, I did. Daphne, thank you very much for a lovely talk. Perhaps in answer for the question that was asked about the last Shannon boat, I have a letter here from the 10th of January 1973, which he wrote to me about the Shannon 1 design he was going to build for me. It says that the price complete for the boat was £275, and he never did get around to building that boat. So we have the letter here.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, very good. Very good.
One other thing that I would mention is that there's a lovely letter written in the Irish Times by Robert Levinge, probably about 1896, about a subject that was much under discussion at the time, and that was the draining of the Shannon. And he was explaining how if the Shannon was ever drained, that all the steamers would be bouncing along the bottom, and that wasn't going to be the answer to all the flooding issues that were perceived as being a big problem at that time and continue to be a problem today. So certainly Robert was well ahead of his time.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. Well, does anybody know where the Narcissus, the steam yacht that Robert had, was built? Or any history? Have you ever, John, have you come across it at all?
No, I haven't. The only thing I have a ventilator on the Phoenix that came off the wreck of the Narcissus.
Okay.
Robert gave it to my great uncle Harry. And
yes.
Now on the foredeck of the Phoenix, a good bronze mushroom ventilator. But I don't know where she ended up, who built her or anything like that. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So is any other questions? I think we've all very quiet. This is a wonderful opportunity now to get.
Daphne,
just if I sorry, Alan. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a picture there earlier of the scholar bar, you thought. I think Alison gave David Beattie a fitting to do with the bowsprit, and it was found there in the grass. It was part of the scholar bar, all right. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember her being there. The Thompsons owned it at the time. I think it was Thompson with the family. Yeah, and she was there for quite some number of years. Painted green at the time.
Right. Oh, Peter Huskinson. Peter, you're on mute, Peter. Peter, could you unmute?
Yeah. Yes, I was just thinking to myself, I remember a lovely story of Walter receiving a couple of ladies for tea one day and giving them some really lovely strawberries. And they asked him after they'd eaten the strawberries, where did he use any fertilizer? And he said, "Oh no, not really. I just put on the contents of the earth closets." And they didn't. They left immediately, evidently.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Peter.
Certainly did love growing strawberries, and he was a great vegetable grower, and we'd all be sent out, and he was particularly keen that we picked peas and beans and brought them up to his great friend Alfie up at the yacht club.
Right. Well, Daphne, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for that real insight into your father and for sharing with us his life and those fantastic photographs which went with it. So that concludes our Zoom series for this year. I hope you've enjoyed it. We've known a bit more about Morgan Giles. We certainly know an awful lot more about Walter Levinge. We've had two great presentations by David Dixon and Owen Delaney and a combined, and then we had Ruth's videos kindly shown by Jerry and Mags, with contributions from the Lefroys, the Murtaghs and Alan Algeo. So that concludes our winter series. We're looking forward now to the first regatta, which is in Mount Shannon, and David's down there in my left-hand corner, all ready to go. And then we go on to the season, which promises, I think, to be an exciting season. It's going to be a busy season, and we look forward to seeing you at some of the centenary regattas. There is the Clinker Fest in Athlone in the June bank holiday, and the long distance race, and also down in Lough Derg. So we expect to see you all at as many events as possible. Have a great season, and thank you very much for joining today. And again, Daphne, thank you very much for an excellent presentation this afternoon.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Daphne.
Thank you very much.